Welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and to click on that bell notification. That way, when we're doing our thing, YouTube lets you know. Today, we're going to continue my top 100 board games of all time, and in particular, we're cracking the top 20, the creme de la creme. So without any further ado, let's get straight to it with my number 20 board game of all time, El Grande, designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Richard Ulrich. And this edition here is by Z-Man Games, and this is the big box edition that includes 5 expansions. El Grande is a classic grandfather of the area control, area majority games that we have all come to know and love. This game here, basically the board consists of a map of Spain that's divided in a bunch of regions according to Renaissance times. And players are trying to get the majority in these regions, or at least the secondary or even tertiary, depending on the player count, in order to score some points every scoring round, right? And there's going to be 3 scoring rounds over the course of either 6 or 9 rounds, depending on whether or not you want to play the long or shorter version of this game. And it's interesting because each player has a Grande figure, which designates their main location. That's theirs, that they'll get some bonus points for. And you're manipulating this big pawn piece, which represents the king, because the king, not only does the king decide whether or not you can place your meeples on regions that are adjacent to it, but also the king again will give you an additional 2-point bonus every time you score. You also have this Castillo here, which you can put meeples in there secretly, and you have to announce how many you're putting at the time, but players are going to have to rely on their memory in order to remember going forward how much they may have placed in there and how much their opponents may have placed there. This is a really cool, streamlined, elegant gaming experience, but at the same time so satisfying and so fun, because at the beginning of each round, players are taking part in an auction to determine turn order, and after they determine turn order, they're selecting these different cards, and the cards will tell you, first of all, how many meeples you can place down on that given turn, and also they'll give you a special ability. So there is some balancing with these cards, because some cards will give you very few meeples that you can place on the board, but at the same time, they might give you a very intriguing and interesting, tempting power that you may not want to pass by. And other cards might give you more weaker, less significant, less drastic powers, but at the same time, they allow you to place 4, maybe even 5 meeples on the board. This game is so much fun. Every time we play it, I wish I played it more often. This is one of the games that I play so seldom compared to how much I like it. But again, one of my favorites, my number 20 in particular of all time, El Grande. My number 19 board game of all time has climbed down on the list. As a matter of fact, I forgot to mention that El Grande was on my list last year and it was ranked number 13, so it's dropped down a bit. Not too much considering how many new games I've played. This game was ranked number 11 for me last year and has dropped down to 19. So both of these games were in the high teens and have dropped down to the low teens, and they've dropped down to the high teens. My number 19 board game of all time is Dominion, designed by Donald X. Vaccarino and published by Rio Grande Games. This is just one of my boxes that I use to contain tons and tons of content. And there's actually a few expansions that I yet to buy, like the Renaissance and the Menagerie expansions. I do not own them. This is the grandfather of the deck building game. So I do have this special place in my heart for classics. Games like El Grande, the grandfather of all the area majority games, and then Dominion, the grandfather of the deck building genre, which has become massively popular. And the thing about Dominion and El Grande is that these are very streamlined experiences. They're so smooth, they're so easy to play, and they play relatively quickly for games that are at the same time feel substantial to me. They feel significant, they feel meaningful, they feel like meaningful gaming experiences. This game here, players have a lineup, a static lineup of 10 kingdom cards, as the game refers to it, and you start your game with a basic deck with some victory points in there that are basically duds, and some small low currency treasure cards. And as the game progresses, you're trying to get more treasure cards, more valuable treasure cards, and at the same time you're trying to buy those kingdom cards because they give you special abilities that you can combo with one another in order to produce some really highly efficient hands, in order to be able to purchase more valuable victory point cards in the future. It's really cool because there's so much variety just from box to box, and as you purchase more and more expansions, then the possibilities are limitless. But it's also really cool just trying to map out the strategic figuring out at the beginning of the game as to what you're going to invest in going forward. First of all, again, it adds to that strategy element because you can map out your game early on, and also it makes for a very quick gaming experience with small downtime in between turns because the fact that the row is static, that there's no reactions, occasionally you might have to react to a decision an opponent makes, but for the most part you see everything there and you can start mapping out your next turn ahead of time and basically do it really quickly. So again, it's a very smooth process. It moves from turn to turn really quickly, and quite often it plays in under 30 minutes. That's been my experience. My number 19 board game of all time, Dominion. And now we move on to my number 18 board game, and this game was also on the list last year, and it was ranked number 9, so it's actually in the top 10 last year. Now it's dropped down to number 18, and that's At the Gates of Loyang, designed by Uwe Rosenberg and published by Tasty Minstrel Games. Uwe Rosenberg is a favorite in this household. He hardly ever lets us down. This game here, players are merchants in medieval or ancient China, actually, and basically you are growing crops on your farms, and you are going to customers in the market, and you're trying to sell them those crops. And basically this is a contract fulfillment game where each customer has a particular set or configuration of veggies that he or she is looking for, and you're trying to fulfill those. So once you've committed to, let's say, a consistent customer, or what's the game refers to, a regular customer, these blue shaded ones, then you need to, from round to round, satisfy their contract, satisfy their needs. And every time you fail to meet their needs on a round, you flip over a satisfaction marker from the blue side to the red side in order to show that you have failed to meet their needs, right here. And if you ever go 2 rounds in a row without satisfying your regular customers' needs, then you pay a penalty. Now, on top of regular customers, you also have casual customers who ask for a little bit more, but pay a little bit more, and you can provide them with their needs whenever you want. You're not committed to providing their needs on a round-to-round basis. So mapping this all out and balancing these decisions as you go, it's really the key of the game. And you're making lots of decisions as the game goes along in order to choose the right crops, to plant them correctly, to harvest them, and to manage them to your benefit. And again, fulfilling those contracts. Smooth, fun, beautiful game. My number 18 board game of all time, At the Gates of Loyang. And now we move on to my number 17 board game of all time. And this is the first one that is new to the list this year. And that is Pandemic: The Cure, designed by Matt Leacock and published by Z-Man Games. Yes, I've mentioned it before. I actually like co-op games, go figure. And I like co-op games that give you a challenge. I like co-op games that have a puzzly feel, mechanically speaking. And this definitely fits both of those criteria. Now, this game here, first of all, it is the dice version of Pandemic. And usually I am not a big fan of dice. I quite often prefer cards over dice games. However, this game is an exception because I just dig the puzzle of it all, figuring it out. And it's very abstracted compared to regular Pandemic, and the argument could be made that regular Pandemic is abstracted. But here you have your globe, your entire world, which is comprised of these disc here, these 6 different discs that represent different continents or portions of continents, and you are going around in clockwise order, moving your pawns, trying to cover these areas and trying to treat their diseases. And what are the diseases, or what are the viruses? They're represented by these color-coded dice that represent the 4 different main viruses that are found in Pandemic. And basically you're rolling them, and based on the pips that are rolled, determine what regions of the earth they're placed on, and you are using your special player roles in order to treat these diseases and ultimately find the cure, Pandemic: The Cure. But what's really neat is that each player has their own customized dice that are unique and specific to him or her as a player. So not only do you have whatever special ability that your player, your character might have, but you also have these nice, neat dice that mean that your turn is going to be radically different than the other player, because the 6 faces of your die don't look exactly the same as your teammate to your right or to your left. So again, that is really, really neat. Managing the currency that you have in this game, which you occasionally roll these cross emblems. that serve as money. Instead of infecting regions, you place them aside on a CDC tile, and you can use them in the future to buy these event cards that are very, very helpful to you. Managing this all out is really, really tough. And I've only played at 2 players, and I figured that at 3 players, it would be a little bit easier. I've only won 1 time out of maybe 20 times playing this game, so it is very challenging. But at the same time, it's a very quick experience. The dice rolling and the randomness of it all makes it very, very fast. Very rarely do you cross 30 minutes playing this game. My number 17 board game of all time, Pandemic the Cure. Now we move on to my number 16. And my number 16 is also new to the list this year, and that is Mercator, again designed by Uwe Rosenberg and published by Lookout Games. And this game, I have talked about it on the channel. This is one of the worst looking games I own, and because of that, it is an underrated game. This game is so smooth, mechanically speaking, so elegant, so juicy and crunchy, but at the same time, the appeal of the components are not going to draw in modern board gamers, right? So you have these nice, cool little trays, which are cool for keeping the resources, but your resources are these very plain-looking, small cubes, right? Colored cubes. And what's interesting is Uwe Rosenberg is usually known for his anime meeples and his veggie meeples and these cool little wooden pieces that are shaped in a way that's more thematically pleasing. The thing about this game is there's tons of resources, and each colored cube actually represents 2 different resources based on where you place them, what section you place them on your individual player board, right? So if you place a red cube here, it would mean that it's spice. However, you place a red cube here, it becomes citrus fruit. So the players have the option. So even that, they couldn't come up with further ways of distinguishing these different resources other than this abstracted representation based on your player board. Now, the main board is a map of Renaissance Europe, and it's a very abstracted map. And it's really represented by a bunch of square spaces with the names of the countries, and they all connect to each other with these lines that connect them. Again, not very pleasing from an aesthetic perspective. It doesn't really draw you in. But let's get to the positive, because this is, after all, my number 16 board game of all time. And the positive is the contract fulfillment. Yet another contract fulfillment game from Uwe Rosenberg on this set of 10. And basically, you have all these differing levels of contracts, ranging from 1 through 10, and you even have, or 2 to 10, and you even have 114. And basically, they tell you where you have to go. This is a pick up and deliver game. Where you have to go, what cubes you need to transport to this region, and basically every time you fulfill a contract, you are going to be able to get coins, and you're going to be able to add future contracts or additional contracts that you can meet in future turns. And you're making lots of decisions. There's a time currency in this game that you're manipulating, because as you go to the different parts of Europe, it takes some time that you have to use depending on where you're going. If you're going to the Newfoundland or if you're going to some other parts, it's more time consuming. And you're also using those time tokens that you accrue throughout the game to pay your opponents to piggyback on their turn. Yes, there's some piggybacking going on. If your player picks up and delivers to some location, then you can pay them some time and go there and benefit from that and maybe fulfill one of your contracts. Really, really cool. The pickup and delivery is really neat. It has a really cool stimulation, market or economy stimulation mechanism, where every time you go to a particular region, you actually trigger or stimulate the economy so that all the regions or countries that connect to that place where you just moved the Mercator piece will also produce more resources that in future turns can be picked up by the players. Really cool game. Again, I wish it was a little bit more aesthetically satisfying, but from a gameplay perspective, it gets the job done. My number 16 board game of all time, Mercator. Number 15 board game of all time is technically new to the list. This game is part of a bigger system of games, which many of those games have made it to my top 100 in previous years, and they usually rank very highly as well. But this one in particular has been new to me this past year. My number 15 game is Command & Colors Ancients, designed by Richard Borg and published by GMT Games. This is a game within the Command & Colors systems, and this is the representative for all the CNC games as far as my list is concerned. There's games known as Battle Cry, Memoir 44, Battle Lore, and many, many other games in this series, but this one's the one that takes the cake for me for many reasons. First of all, thematically speaking, this is the theater of history, the time in history that I am most attracted to, antiquity, and in particular, Roman Greco history. Now, also, mechanically speaking, I like this game more because it's way more strategic. The warfare is a little bit slower, but at the same time, it's way more methodical because you have so many different units that you have to account for. All these other games basically have 3 or 4 units that you have to figure out and keep in mind how to utilize them. This game has several units. I think there's over a dozen different units, and they may or may not all appear within the same battle, the same scenario, but several of them will, and you have to map it all out and figure out how you're going to utilize your different units and optimize your decisions in order to accomplish the victory. So again, really cool. There's so many scenarios in the base game, tons of expansion content for this game. However, if you do not like wooden blocks as opposed to little plastic miniatures as your soldiers, then this might not be the game for you. Also, if you don't like placing stickers for hours on end on those wooden blocks, again, this might not be the game for you. But if you don't mind these things, this game is a rich experience, tactical 2-player gameplay. My number 15 board game of all time, Commands & Colors Ancients. And now we move on to my number 14 board game. And this was on my list last year. It was ranked somewhere in the 30s last year, and now it is ranked number 14. So it's climbed up very much so. My number 14 board game of all time is Thunderstone Quest, designed by Mike Elliott and published by AEG Games. This is a fantasy-themed dungeon crawler of a board game that's really a deck building game, but you get so many of the elements of a dungeon crawler. You have your characters, you're leveling them up, you're making the decision to go into the dungeon, to go deeper into the dungeon, fight the baddies, or to go back to the village in order to level up, in order to acquire more resources, in order to acquire more weapons, in order to acquire spells and recruit different allies in order to join your band of heroes. So cool. And managing that balance of going back and forth between the village and the dungeon, knowing when to decide which one, is the key and the crux of this game. You're leveling up your different characters. You're trying to create these very efficient decks that never get too big, right? Because quite often what you're doing is you're leveling up cards from your deck and getting a higher level upgraded version of it instead of just acquiring more and more cards. So it keeps the deck pretty thin, and at the same time you're still doing the same optimizing that normally takes place in a deck building game, where you're getting stronger cards and trying to work on eliminating weaker cards. So much fun, so much thematic flavor with all the different characters, all the different bad guys that you face, so much content just in this base game, and there's tons of expansions out there. My number 14 board game of all time, Thunderstone Quest. And now we move on to my number 13 board game of all time, and that is RuneBound 2nd Edition. For those who have been watching, you might have caught that RuneBound 3rd Edition also made it to my top 100 board games of all time much earlier on the list. And you probably will disqualify this as a choice. However, I do feel that the two games differ enough to be considered different games, and I like this game that much more than 3rd Edition, hence why it's in the top 20 and the other one is not. Basically, this is the forefather, the flagship game of the RuneBound Terranoff universe that Fantasy Flight Games designed and created, that has so many other games like Descent and Battle Lore and some other games that are very popular and successful for them. RuneBound 2nd Edition basically consists of a map, a board which is a map of the lands of Terranoff. You have a bunch of different cities you can go to, a bunch of different spots that have adventure quests that you could take. And every time you go on an adventure, eventually you're going to end up in a combat encounter. And you're going to use some you're going to use your weapons to upgrade yourself. You're going to get some allies as you go to the different cities and shop. Not only are you shopping for equipment, for armor, for weapons, for spells, but you're also going to shop to recruit allies, because that is going to be how you optimize your attacking. Because what happens with the attacking is there are 3 different categories in this game, 3 different stats or attributes that you have to keep mind of. And basically that's your mind, your body, and your spirit. And each of your characters has a stat for those different areas. And basically those 3 stats also correspond to the 3 different ways of combating, the 3 different ways of battle, which is melee, range, and magic. And the thing about this game is your main character, your hero, can only attack a bad guy in one of those 3 categories. However, you do need to withstand and survive the onslaught of your opponent, the enemies, the bad guys, in each of those different categories of combat. So you want to recruit allies, because if you recruit 1 and 2 at most allies, then you'll be able to attack those enemies in 2 to 3 of those categories and increase your chances of defeating them. There's so many different ways of leveling up and improving your stats as the game progresses. And basically, you are trying to level up your character so that by the end of the game, your character can defeat the High Lord Margath and win the game. Really, really hard. You're also manipulating this Doom track, which basically serves as a ticking time bomb, which triggers the end of the game. And you're managing that and mitigating that to your best in order to buy yourself as much time to level up your character and improve them as much as possible in order to be able to compete again with High Lord Margath. My number 13 board game of all time, RuneBound 2nd edition. And now we move on to my number 12 board game of all time. And we have another cooperative game within this top 10. And this game was on my list last year. As a matter of fact, it was in the top 10. It was number 8, and it just barely missed the top 10 this year. And that is Shadows over Camelot, designed by Ludovic Leblanc and Bruno Cathala, and published by Days of Wonders Games. This is a King Arthur themed cooperative game where players are basically taking on the role of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and you're going on a bunch of different quests as Camelot is being besieged. So we're fighting off these catapults, and at the same time we're trying to accomplish all these other missions in order to fill the round table with at least 7 or more white swords, and that is how you win the game. However, if there's ever 7 or more black swords because you failed on the different quests that you're trying to accomplish, then you lose the game. You also lose the game if Camelot is besieged and 12 or more catapults are placed around the castle of Camelot. So you're figuring all these things out, and you're trying to delegate your responsibilities among your players. This is one of those cooperative games that definitely helps to have more players. A lower player count definitely makes it a little bit more challenging, and this does accommodate up to 7 players. Now, the neat wrinkle in this game is that there is a hidden traitor potentially in this game. And I say potentially because that's the way the rules explains it, and that's the way we play it, where there very likely is a traitor, but there's a slight possibility that there may not be one, and you might just be accusing each other without no basis. And that keeps players from going too strong on their accusations. But you're also trying to figure this out. Are my players around me, are they loyal to me? Who is loyal? And if you are the traitor, you're really trying to, sneak under the radar and find subtle ways of slowing down the good guys from accomplishing their purposes in order to let the game come out victorious. Really fun, beautiful production as to be expected from Days of Wonder. My number 12 board game of all time, Shadows over Camelot. And now we move on to the last one for this list. My number 11 board game of all time just missed the top 10, and just like Shadows over Camelot and a few other games in this set of 10, this game was in my top 10 last year. It was actually as high as number 5 and has been a favorite in my household and in my family for a very long time. Still number 11, and that is Seven Wonders, designed by Antoine Bauza and Repos Productions. This is a classic card drafting, civilization themed game within the board game hobby. Over 10 years old at this point, so this game has been around. It has legs. One of the reasons why it has legs is because of all the expansion content that's come out for it. And here I have a special customized insert that includes many of the expansions within it. I have the Leaders expansion, and I have the Cities expansion, and I have the Wonder Pack expansion, and I have the Babel expansion with its 2 modules, all in this box. And quite often I pull out all the stops and we play Seven Wonders and we throw all of that stuff in. But if you don't use any of the expansions, Seven Wonders is a pretty quick game. You could probably play in about 35 minutes or so. You add the expansions, you're pushing 45, 50, maybe even an hour. But it is such a fun experience. I love the pick and pass card drafting mechanism, but I also like the civilization theme. And yes, it's very abstracted, but I love the idea of building my tableau. And as you go from age to age or round to round, there's 3 rounds, 3 ages in this game, you will see your civilization increase and progress to the point that even when you don't win the game, and I do not win this one often, you still feel very satisfied at the work of your hands. You feel like you created something, like you built something from the ground up. And quite often you fool yourself into thinking, I might have won this one, even though you didn't. And there's 7 spheres of civilization that you're trying to gain points in. And you're going to zero in and focus in and specialize on only a few of those at a time. And from game to game, you might differentiate, you might distinguish it. And that's why I really like about the Leaders expansion, because the Leaders expansion creates a draft, before the game actually begins, that gives you leaders that reward you and benefit you in different ways and steer you in a certain direction. They kind of help you formulate your long-term strategy from the get-go, and as you begin the game, you're making decisions from the very get-go. From round 1, you're making decisions that count, that matter, and that are more valuable when you add the Leaders expansion. Really cool. Again, without the expansions, I feel like this is virtually a gateway game. I say virtually because, yes, there's a lot of symbols to interpret, but once you get past that, the gameplay is smooth and elegant. My number 11 board game of all time, 7 Wonders. And that's it, folks. We're done with this list, and we only have the top 10 left to go. Thank you for watching. Consider clicking on one of these videos on the screen right now. If YouTube is showing them to you, it's because they think there's a really good chance that you will like one of them. Also, check in the description down below so you can find a link to my Patreon and find out how you can become a patron, support this channel, and become more involved with the behind-the-scenes process. Research and find a tier that works for you. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.